Hi everybody, and thank you for watching Gaffer and Gear. Today we're going to take a look at Aputure's most powerful light to date. This is the Storm XT52. This has a 5,200 watt BLAIR light engine, which is a variable white light engine. It can outperform a 6K HMI. Also, we're going to be taking a look at the Reflector Kit. Now this light has a CCT range from 2,500 Kelvin all the way up to 10,000 Kelvin with full green and full magenta capability. It also has a limited color mode, which can actually reproduce over 70% of the colors that are in the Rec 2020 color space. All right, let's start off by going through the pros and cons and doing the cons first to get those out of the way. Now, the first con wouldn't have necessarily made it onto my list of cons if it wasn't for the constant sales narrative saying that at only 28 kilograms, one person can lift this onto a light stand. Now, here's my problem with this. I'm short compared to most gaffers, so I can easily get it onto this stand. But if I want to get it onto a 3-section wind-up stand, which is again what a lot of the narrative is, I have to lift it above my head in order to do that. So here's the problem with this. It's got a very long stirrup. So if you're short like me, you're going to be holding it quite low, which means the weight of the light is quite top heavy compared to where you're holding it. Now, to add to that, if you've got a lightweight modifier like one of the reflectors, this light is extremely back heavy. So when I go to pick it up, I am very off balance trying to get it into the stand. Now, I can get it into the stand by myself, but in order to do that, I have to lie the stand down, put the light on, and then lift it all up. Now let's get into what I think is possibly the biggest negative for me with this light. It is supplied as a standard kit with the medium 35-degree reflector. Now for me personally, if I'm going to buy something with this sort of firepower, I'm probably buying it because I want to light a larger area. 35 degrees isn't going to cut it. Personally, I think they should be selling it with the 50-degree reflector as the standard reflector. Now the next negative is pretty minor, and it's only really a negative if you're a short ass like me. And that is, if you've got it on a 3-section wind-up stand, there are no really convenient grabbing points at the bottom if you want to tilt the light. So at the moment, pretty much all I've got is the ability to push the back, okay, to get my positioning. On the front here, there's a little bit I might be able to get a finger around. If it was wet, that wouldn't really be an option, but everything's pretty slick here. There's not really a lot of points that I can grab on in terms of articulating my tilt. Now you can get around this by buying the optional skids. The skids will give you a grabbing point at the bottom of the light. The next negative for me is the size of the spot reflector. This thing is massive, but it does split into 2 sections for storage. But not only that, it gives you 2 reflector options. You've got a 25-degree beam if you're just using the base, and if you're using the extension, you've got a 20-degree beam. Now, if you want all of the reflectors as a kit, they do pack inside each other, but it is still a massive kit. The next possible negative is if somebody sets a power limitation on the light, the next person to use it has no indication on the controller that there is a power limitation in play unless they go into the menu system. The next thing isn't really a negative, but it's something to be aware of, and it's to do with the advisory that's on the back. It says, to prolong the product lifespan, do not unplug the lamp while powered on. Now that sounds pretty obvious if you're a gaffer. I mean, if this thing was running at full power and you disconnected the head lead, that's a pretty stupid thing to do, but here's what I think this advisory should say. In order to prolong your lifespan, do not disconnect the head lead while the status indicator light is still on. If you've got AC power going into the control box and the control box is connected to the head, regardless of the setting you've got on the power button on the front here, power and data is still going to the head. So when you're packing up, best practice would be to make sure that you've disconnected your AC power lead and that the status light is no longer glowing before you disconnect the head lead. Now let's talk about something that's neither a pro nor a con, and that is a lot of people are excited that you can use this light on something like a 3-section wind-up stand, which is rated at 30 kilograms, because the light only weighs about 28. So here's something to consider. If you're going to do that, you can only use lightweight modifiers like the wide or the medium reflector. And even then, you're very close to the load limit on the light stand, so you really should think about that a bit more. Now, if you want to spot it up and use the big spot reflector, you are definitely going to be over the 30 kilogram load limit on a light stand like this. And I'm guessing with the Fresnel, it's going to be even heavier. Let's get into the pros now, and this thing has a huge CCT range from 2500 Kelvin up to 10,000 Kelvin. Now, this is the only light in its class that has 100% green and magenta correction. Now, another light does claim to have 100% green and magenta correction, which is almost as powerful as this light, but what they mean by that is the display goes from 0 to 100% with their green and magenta adjustment, whereas this light actually has a standard 100% plus or minus green, meaning that 100% green is the equivalent to a full strength correction gel. The next pro is the light and the controller are IP65 rated, so you can use them out in adverse weather. And for the guys working in the condors, you can link up to 45 meters of head lead. That's not 45 foot, that's 45 meters. However, you do go up to the maximum power draw of about 6,000 watt. Now, another big pro for this light is you can set the power draw limit. So here's a few possibilities for that. Maybe you're renting it out to somebody who's only got power distro for M40s. They don't have anything that can run 5,500 watts of power draw. You can set a limit to run off their existing power distribution. And here's another scenario. This will run off a Honda 7 kVA generator, but maybe you can't get a Honda 7 kVA generator into a location and you can only get two of these 3 kVAs linked together. Well, you can set the load limit for the light to run off these two 3 kVA generators linked. Now, while the light won't be running at maximum brightness, it'll still be the single brightest light source that you can run off those two generators. Now, one of the big pros for me is the dimming system on this light. It is not using pulse width modulation. So that means that the light is flicker free. Now, Aputure claim that the light is flicker free at any CCT above 20% brightness. But with my testing, I can't find any flicker at all, even at 0.1%. My meter indicates that there's no frequency there, and I can't get any flicker at all on a high-speed still shutter. Now, usually if you're using constant current dimming, the trade-off is poor performance in the low end. Now, these lights have extremely good CCT accuracy, extremely good white point placement, all the way down to 2% brightness. Now, quite a few times I do find myself running lights at below 2%, but I'm pretty certain that's never going to happen with a light this size. If you're running this at 2%, you definitely pulled the wrong light out of the lighting truck. In terms of other pros, you've got all of the top-end connectivity, DMX, CRMX and Ethernet. And of course, the big advantage this has over other lights in this class is the color capability. Now, initially, I couldn't see the point in color capability in a light this powerful. But here, I'm lighting a room in a color by simply overpowering the ambient daylight in the middle of the day, and I don't even have to black anything out. Now, in terms of its color capability, it's not a full color capable light. So let's do a comparison of this versus the BLAIR CG light engine. Now, the main difference is in the green. This only has a lime, it doesn't have a green emitter. And the other difference is in the cyan. Now, here's the catch. I can only record in Rec 709. So by eye, and if you're recording at Rec 2020, you can see some additional color differences. So I'm just going to call those out as we see them in the test. Now, the graphic in the center of the screen is from the blackout lighting console, and both lights are receiving their commands at the same time. The center circle here gives you an indication of what the target value should be. Now, at this point, the BLAIR CG light engine is way more saturated to the naked eye. And even here, coming into the blues, the BLAIR CG light engine still appears more saturated. Now from here on out, both lights appear the same to the naked eye. Alright, let's go through cost and what you get, and just a reminder that in today's episode I'm not covering the Fresnel or the parallel beam adapter. We're just covering the basic light kit, the road cases and the reflector options. Alright, so let's start off with Australian dollars. If you're buying the basic kit, so that's the light with a reflector, the power supply controller, a head lead and a power lead, you're looking at about $22,000. If you're looking to buy the road cases, that's about $23,100. The reflector kit, which has the wide reflector and the spot reflector options, because the standard reflector is supplied with a light, that's about $1,309. And if you're looking to just buy the wide reflector by itself as an accessory, that is about $380. Now let's have a look at the US dollar prices. So the basic kit without the road cases is about $13,100, but who knows what's going to happen with tariffs. I can't find any price for the flight cases online. The reflector kit, so that's the wide reflector, and the two spot reflectors in the carry case here is about $690 US. And if you're looking to buy the wide reflector by itself, that's about $250 US. Now let's have a look at the road case kit. So it comes in two road cases. One road case is slightly smaller than the other one, but there are footprints on top for the box to sit into so that you can just maneuver it around via the top box. Both the cases are very well constructed. They have reinforced corners and edges, industrial grade carry handles. The top case has extra extension on the handle and a set of caster wheels on the other end so you can roll it around. It can be stored flat, and it also has feet to store on one end. And the larger box has bumper zones. Let's take a look in the smaller case first. In the top of the lid, there's packing instructions so you can remember where everything goes. In this container, we just have the head without the stirrup and the head lead, and everything is fitted in securely. Now let's take a look in the bottom box. And again, we have our packing instructions in the lid. On the top, we have our stirrup. Below that, we have our power cable. And underneath that, we have our power supply and controller. And beneath that, we have our lightning clamp. And on the other side of the box, we have the standard reflector, which is 35 degrees. Now let's take a look at the reflector kit. And they've done as good a job as they can of compacting everything in the one box. The spot extension is packed on the outside. Inside that is the spot reflector, and nested securely inside that is the medium reflector, followed by the flood reflector. Now the reflectors are a metal construction and double skinned, so if you manage to get a dent on the outside, it won't dent the reflector on the inside. And they also have a recognition system so that the light knows which modifier is attached. Now, in terms of the recognition system, this is the first time that I've had a light come in for review and the recognition system is fully programmed and actually works properly. There is almost no difference between any of the modifiers and not having a modifier attached. It's pretty much identical readings on the spectrometer. Now, it very simply attaches onto the front, give it a rotate, and it's locked. They also have a securing point on the top so that you can add a safety chain for extra protection if you want. To release the reflector, just press the giant button on the side and give it a twist and you're done. Now let's have a look at the spot reflector, because that is a little bit unusual. So this is the base of the spot reflector or the narrow reflector. And if you're just using this, you've got a 25-degree beam. Now, if you want to intensify that down to a 20-degree beam, you can add this extension onto the front. So that just locks into place. There we go. Okay, now to give it extra securing, there are some captured nuts here, one on each side. And job done. That's our narrow reflector. Now let's have a look at the head, and it is very well constructed. The mounting section on the front is all metal, and should someone decide to store it face down, it does have 4 feet to stop it from tipping over. Both sides of the unit are an alloy construction with removable stirrups, and the stirrup mechanism is self-locking. Also on the sides we have 2 rigging points, as well as 4 thread mounts. On the back we have a metal carry handle and our inlet for the power. Next to the compliancy plate is a status light. When this glows green, everything is correctly connected. If there is a fault, it will glow red. There is also an additional thread point on the back. On the top of the light is the main carry handle. On the top we have 4 cooling fans, which are all brushless and weather resistant. On the bottom of the light we have 4 feet and 4 additional threaded rigging points. These rigging points are in place for the optional skids. And we also have another 4 cooling fans. The stirrup is an all-metal construction with dual disc brake lock-offs and cable strain relief on both sides. Now the light definitely needs these dual lock-offs because without a modifier attached to the front, it would be way too back heavy for a single lock-off. Let's take a look at the controller now, and it is a very solid construction. And it has an IP65 rating, so it is weather resistant in adverse conditions. Despite its build quality and its weather resistant construction, it only comes in at 13.4 kilograms. It can be operated upright or positioned flat. On both sides, you have your air inlets. On the top of the unit, you have a metal carry handle. Directly below that are your radio receivers. On the front, you've got an NFC receiver. This is something that's starting to become a standard in the industry, not just with Aputure, but with other manufacturers. In the future, you'll be able to tap on this section with a mobile phone and change some of your settings, even if it is not connected to power. On the front fascia, we've got our power button and our user interface. We'll cover this in more detail in a moment. On the side, we have our AC inlet. This has universal voltage input. However, there are some brightness limitations if you're running this at 120 volt. On the top of the controller, we have our inlets and outlets. We have our 5-pin DMX in and out, we have a USB port, and we have 2 local area network connections. And we also have our output to the light. On the back of the unit is the cooling fans, which run extremely quietly, and the mount for our stand clamp. This is an incredibly compact system, considering that not only is it a controller, it has 6,000 watts of power supply. Let's take a look at the user interface, starting off with the CCT mode. We have 3 parameters of adjustment: intensity, CCT, and green and magenta. If I want to adjust the intensity, I highlight the intensity box and then press the button. Once the font changes to bold, it is then adjustable via the knob. Brightness is tunable in 0.1%. If I want to change the CCT, I then press the button, highlight the CCT selection, and then press the button again. The CCT is tunable in 50 Kelvin increments. Our range of adjustment is 2,500 Kelvin all the way up to 10,000 Kelvin. Now just something to note is the amount of green and magenta correction that is available. In the lower Kelvins, this is reduced, but the amount that is correctable is clearly displayed. If I want to get out of the CCT selection and change my green and magenta, I press the knob, scroll down to the green and magenta selection and press again. Green and magenta is tunable in 1% increments. 100% is the equivalent of a full correction gel. Now let's have a look at our other light modes. You can do this by pressing the light mode button, or you can go about it the hard way by pressing the menu button and then selecting your light mode. The next mode of operation is HSIC+. This is our full color mode. We can adjust our intensity, our CCT, we can add a green magenta, we can select our color hue, and we can adjust our saturation. At the moment, we have no saturation at all. Our color hue is tunable in 0.1 of a degree. Now just a reminder again, this is not a full color mode. The greens are not as rich and neither are the cyans. The next light mode is XY. The reduced color gamut that you have to work with is clearly displayed on the graphic. The next mode of operation is special effects, and just to note here, this has all of Aputure's bicolor special effects. So what I mean by that is even though this light is capable of generating color, none of the effects in the menu have color in them. For example, I'm currently running the fire effect, and we've got a choice of warmer, neutral and cooler, but it is essentially running as a CCT mode. Here I'm running the fireworks effect, and we can't select colors. Next in the menu is the Sidus effects, and this is where you can run your custom built effects that you've created in the Aputure app. Now let's have a look in the main menu. We've already covered our light modes, so now let's have a look at our control settings. Let's start off with DMX. We can go to our DMX status screen at the top of the menu. This has lots of useful information at a glance. So for example, I can see what my dimmer curve is. I can see I'm set to CRMX but not receiving a transmission. I can see what my profile is, and I can see how many channels of footprint that profile is taking up. I can also see if the light is set to CIE or black body curve. Next in the menu, we can select our DMX address. That's pretty straightforward, so we'll skip that. Next is our DMX profiles. And we have a massive amount of DMX profiles that we can select from. Next in the menu is our DMX loss of behavior. We've got all of the usual suspects, but like a lot of people, I prefer to have hold last settings. That means if the light loses its DMX or CRMX signal, it won't make any changes until it receives a new command. Next thing in the DMX menu is our DMX smoothing options. I have found that the smooth option gives me a nice mix of response time versus beautiful smoothing. Next in the menu, we can select our DMX termination. This will stop the DMX signal at this light if it is the last light in the chain. Now let's take a look in the CRMX menu. We can turn the CRMX on and off. Select whether we are in RX or TX mode. We can link and unlink and also set our linking key. Now on the next page of the menu, we can select whether the CRMX signal is then converted into DMX and sent out via the 5-pin connections. Next are our Bluetooth settings. In here you can turn the Bluetooth on and off and select whether to reset the Bluetooth. Next in the menu is our Ethernet settings. We can view our IP address, we can select our protocol, we can change our IP address, we can select our universe, and we can select our DMX address. Next thing in the menu is lead or follow. With the use of DMX cables, you could get multiple lights to operate as one by going in here and selecting this light as the leader. Now let's have a look in our system settings. We can update our firmware and do a factory reset from this point. Next in the menu is our accessories. So for example, if we had a motorized Fresnel, I'd be able to operate the flood and spot from in this menu. Next we have our dimmer curves, and we've got the usual suspects. Next in the menu is our power and output. We can select constant output. That'll keep the light at the same brightness levels regardless of the CCT that you've got it set to. I've got it currently set for maximum output, so the brightness will change depending on the CCT you've got selected. Next we can select our maximum power settings. In this section of the menu, you can select the maximum power draw that the light will run to. Now what I have found in my testing is the light tends to run about 200 watt under what you've got selected. So there is some deliberate headroom here. Next, you can set the length of head lead that you wish to run. Now, regardless of the amount of head lead that you dial in, the light can automatically detect if you're using a different amount of head lead. In this section of the menu, you can play around with selecting your maximum power draw and your maximum amount of head lead cable, and the display will give you an indication of what the maximum power output on the light will be. The next thing in the menu is our white light standard. You can select between CIE daylight and the black body curve. CIE daylight will match actual sunlight in the higher kelvins, and it is also the standard by which a lot of our cameras work to. However, the black body standard is a standard that a lot of lighting manufacturers follow, so you can use this mode to match into other lights. Next is our fan settings. Now, when you highlight a parameter of adjustment, it'll give you clear and concise information as to what the maximum brightness you can run the light is with those settings. Next in the menu is our studio mode. When set to studio mode, the light will automatically turn on when it receives power. Next in the menu, we've got our screensaver selections. We can select the amount of time that it takes for the screensaver to turn on. We can change our language, and we can also have a look at the product information. Product information gives us information such as our firmware version, serial number, and our Bluetooth ID. Now let's have a look at how the light performs with no modifier attached. Now it's not the widest spread I've seen on a COB light, but I was quite surprised at the amount of spread for a light with color capability. Most lights with multiple color emitters mixed together tend to be a little bit more spotty than this. And as you would expect from a small light source, you've got a nice singular shadow. Now let's take a look at the shadows from a distance of 10 meters. And as you would expect, it's nice and crisp. Now let's play it as sunlight through a window at a distance of 6 meters. And as I would expect, the shadows are nice and crisp. Now let's take a look at it through the workshop doorway at a distance of 10 meters. And again, you've got even distribution of light and color across the beam. Now running it at night, you get a clear indication of the spread of the beam. Now let's have a look with the medium reflector. And we're looking at the medium reflector now because this is what's supplied in the kit. For me, it does seem like having a 35-degree reflector supplied as the standard reflector is a little bit limiting, but it does have consistent distribution regardless of the CCT or color dialed in. And for my liking, it does have a pleasant drop-off on the edge. But at a distance of around 3 meters, you won't be using this for shadow qualities. Now let's take a look at the shadows at a distance of 10 meters. And we've still got a little bit of soft double shadowing, like you'd get off M series HMIs. Now let's play it through a window at a distance of 6 meters. And we've definitely lost some of the shadow sharpness that we had compared to the light running a bare COB. But what I do find interesting is the amount of coloured light firepower that we have. Bear in mind that this is competing with ambient daylight. To give you an idea of the firepower, I'm now going to expose for the ambient daylight in the room and turn the light on. Now let's have a look at a larger room from a distance of 10 meters. And the shadow qualities do make it feel like it's sunlight. But again, I'm surprised at how much coloured light we have, bearing in mind that this room is not blacked out. And to give you an idea of the firepower, I'm now going to expose to the ambient light in the room. Now, lighting up a larger area, you can see that it definitely has a pleasant drop-off on either side of the beam. Now let's have a look at the optional wide 50-degree reflector. And this has a beautiful even distribution of light and colour quality. Now for this test, I remember to put a light stand in the centre so you can gauge the consistency of the shadows across the beam. The shadows are reasonable for a faceted reflector, but they definitely don't feel like sunlight at 3 meters. Now let's have a look at the shadows at a distance of 12 meters. And if you really look for it, you can see some double shadowing, but that's a pretty good shadow for a faceted reflector. Now let's play it through a window at a distance of 6 meters. And I gauge the shadow quality to be somewhere between that of the naked COB and the medium reflector. For me, the shadows are good enough to have that sunlight feel, but I reckon a fussy cinematographer might not agree with me. And again, to give you some idea of the firepower, I'm exposing to the ambient light in the room. Now let's do the same test in a larger room with the light at a distance of 10 meters away from the door. And for me, the shadow qualities and consistency of the light across its beam makes it feel like sunlight. And again, to give you an idea of the firepower, I'm going to expose for the ambient daylight in the room. Now let's have a look over a wider area. And once again for me, this has a pleasant drop off on either side, which makes it easier to blend into large environments. Now let's take a look at the narrow base reflector. So this gives us a 25-degree spread. As I've come to expect from Aputure spot dishes, it does have that bit of a hot spot in the centre. But to be fair, we're looking at it here at a distance of 3 meters, which is a bit unrealistic. And at 3 meters, the shadows are not great. Now let's take a look again at a distance of 12 meters. Now the edges of the shadows are not crisp, but they're still looking okay. Now let's blast it through a window at a distance of 6 meters. We've still got some shadow texture there, but it's nowhere near as sharp as it was. To give you an idea of the firepower, I'm going to expose for the ambience. Now let's do the same thing again, but in a larger space from a distance of 10 meters away. And again, I'm going to expose for the ambience and then turn the light on. And for a more realistic use case scenario, let's have a look at it outside. And unlike most of Aputure's spot reflectors in the past, I think this is really usable. Now let's have a look with the spot extension, which gives us a 20-degree beam. At a distance of 3 meters, it does have a bit of a hot spot in the center. And there's a lot more wrapping with the shadows. Now let's take a look at the shadows at a distance of 12 meters. And for a light that's in full spot, this has some impressive shadows at this distance. Now let's play it through a window at a distance of 6 meters. There's definitely way less texture in the shadows, but just to note how much firepower we've got here, it's daytime outside and it looks like it's nighttime, especially when the coloured light comes into play. And again, let's expose for the ambience. Now let's do the same thing in a larger room, but this time with the light at a distance of 10 meters. And fully spotted in a large area, this performs like I would expect an Aputure spot dish to perform. Now let's get into the CRMX testing, which is literally watching how the light responds to wireless commands. Now my episodes are indexed and chaptered, so if you don't want to watch 10 minutes of lights fading up and down, you can very easily skip this section. The Storm XT52 is receiving its commands via its internal CRMX receiver. It is set to mode 22, which is a CCT plus HSI 16-bit profile. And for the initial start of this testing, its smoothing is turned off. To give you something to compare it to, I have a Storm 1200X, because with its new firmware update, this has really good CRMX response. Now this is not a brightness comparison. The Storm XT52 has no modifier attached, and the Storm 1200X is nearly in full spot with its Fresnel. Both lights are receiving their commands at the same time via the blackout lighting console. The signals are being transmitted by a Cerise CRMX transmitter, which refreshes the signal at 41 Hz. To start off the testing, let's have a look at instant on-off commands. Now let's have a look at some half-second cues. Now for some 1-second cues. Now for some 2.5-second cues. And some 5-second cues. Now for the rest of the testing, both lights will have their smoothing turned on, and it is set to the fastest responding smoothing. Let's take a look at instant on-off commands. Now for some 1/2-second cues. Now for some 1-second cues. Now for some 2.5-second cues. And now for some 5-second cues. Now for some changeovers between 5600 Kelvin and 3200 Kelvin, starting with instant changeovers. Now for some 1/2-second changeovers. Now for some 1-second changeovers. Now for some 2.5-second changeovers. Now for some 5-second changeovers. Now we'll do the Cue testing again, but this time with the maximum brightness only set to 10%. And just to note, 2 decimal points are displayed. Let's start off with some 1/2-second cues. Now for some 1-second cues. Now for some 2.5-second cues. And finally, some 5-second cues. Now let's have a look at some changeovers between a CCT and a color hue. And for this testing, I don't have any other light that's bright enough for a comparison. Let's take a look at instant changeovers. Now for some half-second changeovers. Now for some 1-second changeovers. Now for some 2.5-second changeovers. And finally, some 5-second changeovers. Let's start going through all the data I've collected, starting with AC power draw. And just something to note, I don't have the tools to take power factor readings on a light of this firepower. Now, just a few things to note. This light is outside of the power range of my meters. So I got these readings off the display of a Honda 70 EU IS generator. So they are rounded. I was also running 10 meters of stinger from the generator to the light. The light had the 7.5 meter head lead and it had no limiting set. So the one figure to note is at 5,600 Kelvin, it's pulling 5,550 watt. The constant load rating on a Honda 70 EU IS generator is 5,500 watt. So if you're going to use one of these generators, it might pay you to do a bit of testing with your power distribution in play and set a limit accordingly. Now let's take a look at the dimming system. According to my frequency meter, no frequency is detectable. So this light is running a constant current dimming system, which means it is entirely flicker free, regardless of the frame rate or the shutter angle that the camera is running. Let's take a look at the dimming characteristics at 3,200 Kelvin. I've taken readings at 100%, 75%, 50%, 25%, 10%, 5%, 1%, and 0.1%. The actual brightness is very close to the target value, except below 5%. The CCT values are extremely close to the target value across the entire dimming range. The color render does drop from a 94 down to a 92, and there is absolutely minimal green and magenta shift all the way down to 5%, and even below 5%, the amount of shift is less than the equivalent of 1/2 of a 1/8 correction gel. Now let's take a look at 5600 Kelvin. Again, the actual brightness is very close to the target value, except under 5%. Again, the CCT is extremely close to the target value across the entire dimming range. And the color render does drop down to a 93. However, it is still at a 95 at 10%. And there is absolutely minimal green and magenta shift. Now let's take a look at the average CCT accuracy. And I've taken readings at every Kelvin from 2500 up to 7000 Kelvin, where I stopped taking individual readings. Now I've broken the readings down into unusual groupings. I've done this so that the averages won't be misleading. Now let's have a look at the color render measured in TM30RF. Again, I've taken readings at every CCT from 2500 Kelvin up to 7000 Kelvin. The lowest score is a 92, but that's only at the bottom two CCTs, and the highest score I recorded was a 97. Now let's have a look at the white point or green magenta shift measured in delta UV. And just a note for this testing, the light was set to CIE daylight. From 2500 Kelvin to 3000 Kelvin, it was accurate to plus or minus 0.0003. 3050 Kelvin to 4000 Kelvin, it has an average delta UV of minus 0.0007. Between 4050 Kelvin to 5000 Kelvin, it breaks away from the Planckian curve and heads up to the daylight curve, which is why I don't have an average, but it starts out at minus 0.0006, and at 5000 Kelvin it hits plus 0.0027. And between 5050 Kelvin to 6000 Kelvin, it is tracking very close to the daylight curve. Now let's take a look at some of the higher Kelvins, between 7500 Kelvin and 10,000 Kelvin, taken in 500 Kelvin increments. Let's take a closer look at some of the CCTs now, starting off with the lowest CCT that we can dial in. When I dialed in 2500 Kelvin, I got 2491. The TM30 color testing results were 92% average color accuracy with an average 97% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R7, R8, R9 and R12 were below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is near perfect with a delta UV of plus 0.0001. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3191 with an SSI score of 86. The TM30 color testing results were 94% average color accuracy with an average 98% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R8, R9 and R12 were below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0006. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4411. The TM30 color testing results were 95% average color accuracy with an average 100% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R12 was below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point was very accurate with a delta UV of plus 0.0005. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin with the light set to CIE daylight, I got 5612 with an SSI score of 86. The TM30 color testing results were 97% average color accuracy with an average 101% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R12 was below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0030. So if you work into the black body curve, this light would have a slight green hue to roughly the equivalent of 3/4 of a 1/8 correction gel. And if you work into the daylight curve, which the light was set to, it is smack on. When I dialed in the top Kelvin of 10,000, I got 10,392. The TM30 color testing results were 94% average color accuracy with an average 100% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R9 and R12 were below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the light came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0018, so it is still tracking somewhere between the black body and daylight curve. Okay, so just my closing thoughts. Once I've finished doing the review for the parallel beam reflector and the Fresnel when that arrives, will I be keeping or selling this system? And I've really agonized over this decision because it's a fantastic light, but I'll be selling it because I just don't have the clientele that uses this sort of firepower. I've got two 2400s, I hardly ever use those, and when I do use them, they hardly ever run at 100%. So I really don't need anything with this sort of firepower. Now, it was a big agonizing decision for me because if I rent this out, I do have a 7 kVA generator. I could possibly rent that out as well and collect money on both of them. But I honestly think a lot of the gaffers that I know that want this sort of firepower, they would probably end up buying this, I think, because it is quite a good unit. Now, in terms of if I did need that firepower as someone who's an owner-operator running out of a van, would I have this light in my kit? Well, yes. I wouldn't keep everything that Aputure sent me, but here's what I would keep. I definitely wouldn't bother with the road cases. I would keep the head, the controller, of course, and I'd keep the two smaller reflectors, the wide reflector, which is 50 degrees, and the medium reflector, which is 35 degrees, because these two do pack into each other. So, the two reflectors don't take up that much space in a sort of medium-sized lighting vehicle. The head's not all that big for the firepower that you're getting, and the controller is definitely very compact. And in terms of the weight, it's not ridiculously heavy. But let's say I wanted to spot the thing up. Well, then we're getting ridiculous for me. I mean, this is way too big a system to keep in a lighting van, even though it does split in half. And it is over the 30 kilogram limit of a 3-section wind-up stand once you put this on the light. But in terms of the storage space, the reflector kit with the spot reflectors, we're starting to get big. So for me, that would be a no, having the spot reflectors. In terms of spotting it up, I think a lot of people are going to be interested in the Fresnel when that arrives, because that does look like, with the light, and they've got a nice set of skids for it as well, it looks like it's going to be quite a compact system for the firepower that you will get. But how much will it weigh? That'll be the ultimate thing for a lot of people. Thanks for watching Gaffer and Gear. Don't forget to click like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.